Welcome, everyone, for a talk today at the Silver Lining by Sally Tissington, our creative writing teacher. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, Sherry, and hi, everybody, and thanks very much for joining. I have to apologise at the beginning of this. My laptop is playing up, which I explained to Hayley earlier. So if you can hear some pinging, there's nothing that I can do about it. So I'm asking you to bear with me, and I hope it isn't too loud. But my plan today is um, not to talk for too long, to talk for about 20 minutes, and then to get everybody writing in a nice, gentle writing exercise. And I will be asking people to share their work, but you don't have to at all. Can you hear the pinging? Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I'm glad that you can't hear it. Okay. So the talk will be my background, an introduction to art and writing for wellbeing, an overview of the groups that are already running at Silver Lining, and then an introduction to the Inspirational Speakers Programme, Sherry's latest idea for Silver Liners, and then the writing exercise. So a little bit about my background. I was age 30. This is 30 years ago now to the day. When I set out on a journey of creativity, I was stuck in a job that I absolutely hated. And I knew I had to leave for my own sanity. I didn't know
Sally,
exactly who I,
does that mean it's your birthday?
no, not today. No, but
Oh,
very soon. No. So I decided that I wasn't going to stay, that I couldn't stay. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. And my first step, two years after that, was train as a fine artist. And from there, I was adding a lot of words to my images. And that wasn't fashionable at the time at all. It was actively discouraged. But I knew that word and art would always go together for me. It was so important to me. So I went off and trained to be a creative writer. I went to Norwich and I did a master's in creative writing. I wrote a novel. I've written loads of short stories. I eventually got the novel published by a very small publisher. I've always used my own work for healing. Um, it's a huge thing for me, and the novel was no exception. It was about helping me cope with a period of grief that I was going through, and it really, really did help. And some of the talk that I'll be sharing with you in a minute is about how cathartic writing can be. So I've worked in universities. I worked at Warwick University teaching undergraduates how to be more creative. I ran a module for several years called Myth, Madness and Play, which was about helping people become more creative. I've worked in schools and for charities. And I think I've been with the Silver Lining now for 3 years this Christmas, which I can't quite believe, but there you go. Um, I knew that I wanted to move into more of a therapeutic space, so I did an MSc in creative writing for therapeutic purposes, which is absolutely wonderful. And on the 12th of December, I finish an MA in arts psychotherapy. So bringing sort of art and word together has just always been the thing that I really wanted to do and am doing. So I just want to give a little introduction about artists, whoops, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Artists who've used their work um for healing. And so lots of artists obviously have used their art to express struggles with illness, disability, or pain. And Frida Kahlo's a popular example of someone who's done this. So she's very popular around at the moment. So she was a Mexican surrealist painter, and she painted lots of self-portraits that showed her health problems, which were prolific. So she had polio as a child, and then a condition of the spine that caused nerve degeneration. Then she was in a terrible tram accident where her pelvis and foot were crushed. So as a result of all these things, she had numerous operations, and she used her painting to sort of to cope with her pain and to express who she was and to show in a way how defiant she was and how powerful she was despite the difficulties of her life. So, oh, why is that not going forward? Hmm. of a slight technical hitch where it's not the slideshow isn't moving forward.
You may have to go out, come back in if that's the case.
Okay, thank you.
Try.
Oh, hang on, see if that one works. Oh,
Oh,
it worked.
well done.
Doing
Well
it. Thank
done.
you. So this one is called The Two Friedas. So it's two different versions of herself. The Frida on the right is wearing traditional Mexican dress, and the Frida on the left is wearing a white dress. So I suppose the two different aspects of her personality. This was painted in 1939 after her divorce. So I suppose hence the very stormy, dark sky and her heart's sort of open. And it's quite a challenging image to look at, but I guess you could say it expresses the sort of grief of the divorce. Okay, let's see if the next one works. Yes, this one again is showing her spine as a broken pillar. It's called, I think it's called something, let me have a look. Something like the broken column. Again, quite a difficult image to look at, but gives you a sense of how she was feeling about the damage to her spine and the difficulty in her life, but still a very, very powerful piece of work. The artist Paul Clay is another example. So he's remembered his sort of playful, childlike drawings, which are absolutely gorgeous. But in the second half of his life, he had a progressive disease called scleroderma, a shrinkage of the skin and muscles. So he couldn't create the way that he'd created in the beginning. And his later work certainly shows his physical and emotional struggles. And he said, "Never have I drawn so much or so intensely. I create in order not to cry." So if we have a look at some of his work, this is one of his earlier works. So it's gorgeous, detailed, playful, colourful. I find it absolutely delightful. And the change in this from that to this when his illness was progressing. I mean, obviously he's not here to talk about his work, and we have to be very careful about interpreting people's works, but we can agree that this has become perhaps darker. It's sort of simpler. He couldn't create the detailed pictures that he had done in the past. And then just another one. This one was towards the very end of his life when he was struggling to make detailed images. Virginia Woolf, if we go on to writers now, a great example of someone who used her writing for as a cathartic sort of method. And it allowed her to release emotions around her mother's death when she was 13. And she said she's writing a book, The Lighthouse, and she said, "I wrote the book very quickly, and when it was written, I ceased to be obsessed with my mother. I no longer hear her voice. I do not see her. I suppose that I did for myself what psychoanalysts do for their patients. I expressed some very long felt and deeply felt emotions, and in expressing it, I explained it and then laid it to rest." And there's an image from the front cover of the book here, which is rather lovely, that I thought I would put in. When it comes so that's fantastic anecdotal evidence from people saying that they use their work to make them feel better, but there's science behind it too. The social sort of psychologist James Pennebaker is probably the best known person who's done lots and lots of research about how expressive writing, how writing about our troubles and what's hurting us can make ourselves feel better. So he sort of says expressive writing helps people cope with trauma. And by trauma, I mean something that you're living with on a daily basis, which is causing you pain and affecting your life. So he wrote a book, just trying to see if I can see it, but I can't immediately, called Opening Up: The Healing Power of Confiding in Others. And he told students to write in a journal for 15 minutes a day for 4 days. So it isn't very long before you get a positive effect on doing this. And he told them to write continuously about the most upsetting or traumatic experience of your life. But there are some warnings about that, which I'm going on to with the next slide. They couldn't just do it, they had to do it in a very specific way. And I think that the researchers were very worried this would make people worse, make people feel worse. But it didn't. It improved physical and mental health. And the participants were also tested 4 months later and found that they were still in a better place. They even did blood tests on them and showed that their immune systems had been strengthened through this exercise. But it's very important to do it in a specific way. There's advice that sort of says, this is the way that we must tell our stories without re-traumatizing ourselves or making ourselves feel worse. And the advice, some really, really good advice comes from Louise DeSalvo. And she says, there's a better chance of positive mental health benefits from writing that is detailed, organized, compelling, vivid, and lucid. And Pennebaker says, writing is good for the health if it is self-reflective rather than being safely impersonal or filled only with uncensored complaining or unexplored expressions of anger. So I suppose what he's saying, which I find interesting, is we can't just rage out onto the page. That won't necessarily make us feel any better. I mean, there might be times when that works and that's okay. But if we really want to feel better, there's a different way to do it. And it's as Louise de Salvo says, it's got to be detailed, organized, vivid. Um, the writing has to be a certain way. And we'll talk about that a bit more when we talk about the new writing group, where silver liners will have a chance to tell their stories. So, oh, gone too far. Okay. So I just need to move this bar because I can't see my own thingy. Okay. So now just a quick run through with what we do in the creative writing groups. So two creative writers already here listening to this, both fantastic writers. So in the main creative writing group, we look at poems and sometimes flash fiction. We choose a line or a phrase from the poem that is interesting to us. We never worry about spelling or grammar or how the writing's going to turn out. We just start to write. People don't have to share. Sometimes in writing group, you could end up writing something that felt very personal that you don't want to share with others. And then if I ask people to share, you can just say, no, thanks, Sally, and we move on. And that's absolutely fine. The creative writing teacher, Peter Elbow, says that we don't know what we want to say until we start saying it, which I think is a lovely phrase and quite useful. So you just start writing about absolutely anything. So that's the first creative writing group. The short story group, which has been running for about 5 months now, has been great, and we haven't shied away from difficulty in this in any way, as I'm sure the people who join this group will attest. So we've looked at classics short stories and modern short stories. We've looked at things like Chekhov story, and we looked at Gooseberries, and there's some great research actually about reading stuff like Chekhov, saying that once you've read it, they've done tests on people to show that after you've read some fiction like that, that you're better able to emotionally recognize faces. So they get people to read some Chekhov and then they test them with different facial expressions to see how accurate their responses are. And it turns out that once you've read something like that, then your emotional sort of understanding of people is better, which I think is interesting. We've looked at Oscar Wilde's The Happy Prince, James Joyce, Evelyn, and the more modern stories like Lentils and Lilies from Helen Simpson, which is a story about growing up and motherhood. And Louise Eldridge, The Shawl, she's a Native American writer. And oh yeah, Jean Giano, if that's the way you pronounce it, The Man Who Planted Trees. That's probably the most optimistic and uplifting story that we've looked at. And this is a lovely lino cut from that story. And it's just a beautiful story about a man who lives very quietly as a shepherd and plants trees all his life. And in the end, he's sort of planted this extraordinary forest. And of course, the children's book, The Woodland's Friends, which is a gorgeous book, completely written and illustrated by silver liners. All the photographs, all the artwork is done by silver liners, and it's a really, really stunning book. And every time I look at it, I think again how lovely it is. So the new group, what will it be about? So a group of brain injury survivors sharing their stories, and the aim will be to inspire audiences in schools and community venues. So if you choose to go and do this, you would go and speak in a community venue about surviving your brain injury, how it's been for you, the story basically behind, how you're doing now, what's been difficult, what you've overcome, a very sort of honest story. And it will be supported by the children's book that's been written in the previous class, the Woodlands book. So you might take some of those copies with you and hand them out to people. So a chance to tell your story with honesty and get the respect you deserve. So when we do classes for autobiographical writing, for instance, you telling a story about your brain injury, we would look at some other great memoir and autobiographical writers and think about how we make your story come to life, how we make it vivid and memorable. We'll be looking at exploring themes of resilience, your identity, and the healing that's happened for you. When we run the group, we'd be focusing on safety, so telling your stories without getting yourself into a position where you felt that you were re-traumatized. And of course, silver liners always in the group support one another. And it's a great chance to hear and share your story. So Sherry's idea is that silver liners become inspirational speakers. They share their personal experiences to educate and inspire others. And it will build confidence, skills, and have an impact on the community. It sort of raise awareness for the Silver Lining charity. But basically, a project about hope and courage and storytelling. And I think that's pretty much the end of my talk. So what I want us to do is to do a tiny bit of creative writing if you're willing. And the quote I've got today is, I think, a gorgeous quote from John O'Donoghue. And it says, I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. And I'd like people to sort of think about that phrase and see if they can write from it. It doesn't matter what you write, write in your own style, in your own way, in your own words. You cannot get this wrong. Don't worry about spelling or grammar. And you don't even have to go with the tiny bit of writing we've got here. Maybe you don't want to live like a river flows, and that doesn't mean anything to you. Some people have said, well, I want to live like a champagne cork popping the ceiling. I want to live like a bird flying free. Anything goes. But we just start from this as a bouncing off point. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can come back and see if anybody's willing to have a go at writing.